Welcome back, our dear citizens of Uganda, to this another episode of the Citizens Chat Show. This is one of the conversations that and the spaces that are really exciting us in Uganda today. Many people are talking about the Citizens Chat Show because of the kind of discussions that we're having here. This show and this space is entirely for you, the citizens of Uganda, to come and share your thoughts, to come and deliberate, to come and really have a conversation that is genuine, that is that will change the course of actions in Uganda. Today is the same like we had last week. That was really exciting, and today I am pleased to have another exciting group of panelists, and this time round they're youthful and with quite a lot of energy. So our discussion today is live on our Civic Space TV. You can also follow the discussion on this Chat Show Uganda. That's the Twitter hashtag. This show is running live on Facebook. It's running live on YouTube. You can connect on there and join the discussion. You can also drop your comments there for us to follow through. You can drop your comments there to capture. We'll need to capture them and also try to have a reaction on them at some point. So we're welcoming you today for this another episode. This is the fourth episode that we are running into, and today we are discussing the demands that the young people want or expect for the next government, but also trying to harmonize and see are there any common interests that the young people from the different shades have that would be or they would want the government to advance or the parliament to advance. So right about this time, I have a very interesting panel here of ladies and gentlemen from the different shades of all the political parties and civil society that I would want to have a conversation. It should be as engaging, as interesting like the young people you are. And let's have this rolling. So from the topic of today, I would want to invite each one of us to have a take on it. But from then, I always start from here. This time around, I need to start from the far right. To introduce you the guests that I have Eyeru Jacob is the chairperson of the National Youth Council, right the right. Then next to him is Abubakar Matanda, advocate of the High Court, but also is the national coordinator, youth coordinator of Alliance for National Transformation. And Jacob is from N.U.P.
Yeah.
Yes. Then from off Matanda we have Ruth Asiimwe. She's the ED, the executive director of Youth Line Forum. Yeah, okay, it's a platform for the young people. Yeah, so yes, that's interesting. Then in between is Harris, Akampulira. He's a Lord Councillor, yeah, Muluka 3, that's Makerere. Then right here we have Joyce Adikini. Adikini. Okay. She's a clerk of People's National Assembly. That's from the F.D.C. Akampulira is from National Unity Platform.
Yes, of course.
Yes. Yeah. We needed to underscore that. Yeah. So the topic today, we are discussing youth demands from the next government, and do youth have a common interest? Yeah. So I would want to start with Jacob. What do you think? But in there, you would first try to greet our viewers, but also then take us through that. But in there, I would also want to have you just have a take on the situation in Tanzania and what do you have to say about it as a young person?
Thank you, Damian, and I want to thank you for hosting us. Let me start with the condolence message. We want to condole with the people of Tanzania and the young people of Tanzania. There is never a situation where the death of a president in power is a good thing. unless it is by either popular uprising of the people or something, which is not in other interests but in national interests. In the case of Tanzania, the masses show that it is a very sad time for them, and we mourn with them the loss of their president. The National Youth Council of Uganda has conveyed a message to the High Commission and to the people of Tanzania, to UV CCM, and to the Zanzibar Youth Council. We hope that they can go through this time, and we want to also thank the people of Tanzania for setting an example that is uncommon in Africa, where the death of a leader in power does not mean that there is therefore now a new anarchy and so on. There's a very smooth transition, and the transition happened in the stipulated time. So we are very proud of Tanzania, and we hope that Uganda can follow in their example in the years to come. I want to say that I am happy to be on this panel with distinguished friends. I'll chip one for the camera. Harris here was the first person to introduce me to political party elective politics. Today he's in N.U.P and I am in the NRM. But as a first-year student at Makerere, Harris recruited me to campaign for him to be guild president of Makerere. To cut the long story short, he did not succeed in getting me into F.D.C, but at least he got me to believe in values, shared values, and we could agree on certain things. So I'm now happy that I can now sit at the table of men with the people who brought me up. That said, I want to be very clear on what I think that young people need in the next years for the new government. First, I don't think that there's even anything to call a young people's need in this country. I think it is a population need because the country is generally young. If you have the majority of us children, and then the youth come in next, and then you go to the elders. As you go higher, the numbers reduce in Uganda. And it is so big at the base that the pyramid has no apex. We are still in the middle there because we are so many at the base. So I think that any pro-people agenda by government is a pro-youth agenda, and it's a pro-young people agenda. So for me, really, what the young people need in Uganda is what a nation should have as an effective nation. And in many ways, we have said so many things in terms of what exactly we need. The question of unemployment, which has become our campaigning tool in the country. Everyone jumps on it because it is the biggest problem, needs to be addressed. And I don't think that the next government would do well to Ugandans if it does not show how exactly it is going to address that with certain levels of precision. The other thing that I think young people need and will continue to always need is a peaceful country. Uganda, through the election phase, was not very peaceful. And it was not one side. It was both sides of action. That supporters of different political candidates expressed remorse in ways that were not peaceful, even in justified situations. But there are also situations where state actors and agents acted in ways that are not lawful or are not welcome of a peaceful society. So I think that the young people of Uganda need to see that government has commitment to a peaceful country and one that respects their rights as young people and as legitimate citizens of the country. So there are very many necessities. I fear that if I say all of them, my colleagues will not have any to say. So I'll stop at 2 and I allow them to contribute.
Thank you, Jacob. I think from then I can ask Harris. Yeah, can you have your take also? Brief our audience and also share through.
Yeah, thank you, Demiano. By the way, for record purposes, I will since drop to the label Harris, and my proper name is Akampulira Harris. And I would like to thank you, Demiano, for inviting me here to share this space with young people. It's been a while since I
You signed the poll deed.
Sorry?
You signed the poll deed.
The legalities of that Demian who come to it later.
But the advocate is here. Take his talk.
All right, so I mean, I have seen this young man grow. I introduced him to politics. Of course, my biggest failure is that I failed to show him the light to its fullest extent. He's a talented young man, but how he ends up in the NRM up today is still very disturbing. And I'm serious about this because, you know, rightfully is just condoled with the people of Tanzania. I do condole with the people of Tanzania for the loss of the president, sitting president. For them, they are lucky that there is some semblance of constitutionalism. There's a peaceful transfer of power from one president to another. And even when there was an abrupt death of the president, according to the constitution, there was a peaceful transfer, no bullet was fired, no people were ran over, just because there's going to be change of power. I imagine it would have been a completely different situation had it been here in Uganda. Maybe Bob Wine, VSJ, and all those opposition politicians would first of all be rounded up and put under house arrest or worse. But what is even more intriguing about the NRM people and the kind of messages they've been sharing about, appraising the kind of President Magufuli was, is that it's counterintuitive. Their government practices exactly the opposite of what Magufuli did. Of course, there is one thing I think they share in common, that they were both autocrats. The government of Museveni is a big-time autocracy, and Magufuli also ran a big-time autocratic regime. But unlike Museveni, Mr. Museveni, President Pombe Magufuli managed to do, achieve certain significant socio-economic developments for his country in record time. He's constructed more kilometers of tarmac road than Museveni has in the last 30 years. He is able to root out corruption. Museveni feeds and sustains the regime on corruption and patronage. He's been able to, cut all the government wastages. That is the order of the day. So I don't know how a young person as talented as Jacob is one of our best brains, as talented as he is with capabilities of analysis. At the same time, he's able to credit the achievements in Tanzania without critiquing or trying to find a solution to the numerous wastages and human rights violations that we are experiencing in this country. And as I conclude my submission, Demian, I would like to weigh in on that topic. Whether young people should expect anything in the next government at all. Because first of all, do we have a government properly speaking? Or we have a semblance of government? I think I agree with one political commentator who defined the government in Uganda as a small group of people which has come together to eat on behalf of others. So I think that the agenda of the young people in this country for the next 5 years is to come together across ethnic lines, across religious divide, across all sorts of bases, come together to realize that the next 30 years belong to us as a generation to offer a leap forward for this country. But we must first and foremost remove a huge obstacle that stands in the way of us to do that. And that obstacle is to remove a government that is not for the people, a government that has no legitimacy at all. So what took place was that an election, it is the most rigged election in the contemporary history of Africa. Most rigged. The dead voted, as you are aware, that they resurrected and voted. You have polling stations in Churura where the voter turn up, is higher than the number of registered voters. So this is a sham government without any basis in law. So for young people to expect anything from this government, I think is a little bit fantastic in thinking.
Thank you. Okay, I know, Jacob, you'd want to weigh in it, but that is for later. That's for later. Let me get closer to me here, then I'll get back to the team then. Joyce, first weigh in and first greet also our viewers.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, viewers. My name is Joyce Adikini, like I was introduced earlier. Now, on the issue of Tanzania, allow me also first put across my condolence message to the people of Tanzania for having lost their leader in the mysterious manner just a few months after they had re-elected him. Like the previous viewers have mentioned, I mean my fellow panelists have mentioned, the president of Tanzania performed quite a lot in terms of developing and social services in his country. When you compare the kind of things that he did within the 5 years that he was president, and you look at other African countries, more so our country, Uganda, you realize that he had done what many people thought is not achievable. And most so, he did it without too many loans. He was someone who was, let me say, anti-borrowing. So he relied on the taxes of the natives to build their own country. And when you come to other countries like where we are in Uganda, you realize that nothing can move without borrowing. Even when we were faced with a pandemic recently, the government could not even procure posho and beans for people of Kampala without borrowing trillions. Parliament passed a supplementary budget of money that was not there, that was supposed to be borrowed from the EU and China and other countries to come and help us. So we operate like as though our economy has nothing, and the only way we depend is from other people. Whereas in Tanzania, the president there managed to portray to this world that in Africa, people have the capacity to fund their own needs. And to me, that is a plus. It is not something that anyone can wash away or even wish away. We only wish other governments, more so the one we shall have in Uganda at some point, emulates and does something like that in our own country. There are, of course, faults. Not everyone is 100% perfect. He could have mishandled a few things, maybe in terms of the freedom for his people, and maybe in the way that he handled the pandemic, which claimed several lives here and there. But generally, he did his best, and maybe God took him at the right time before he could spoil the good thing he had done. Because when you compare the development and the human rights violations in the country, you realize that both of them were growing at the same rate, that the country is developing at the same rate on which freedom and rights are being violated. So maybe God took him at the right time, and we pray that whoever is taking over from him tries to balance between development and human rights, and so that everyone within the country can enjoy what development the government is putting across. Like my colleagues mentioned here, I'm glad we are both comrades. Most of us here have met before. Harris was, I met Harris in F.D.C. at Makerere when he contested for the Guild presidential primaries. And unfortunately,
and I got 0. And you were a delegate.
Unfortunately, I wasn't a delegate.
You were in the same year?
No, he was a year ahead of me.
Yeah, but Jacob was my campaign manager.
I think that's why he went where he belonged. How did he steal the vote? So I think as we interact here, we are going to agree on many things. having had some background together, it means our minds could meet on several issues as young people. Because, like you mentioned, we should have a common interest and push for that common interest. So that now takes me to the next issue, which is the expectations that we have in the next government. I've been thinking of that question and asking myself, which one is the next government? Is it the one that I should have my expectations on? Is it the one that is going to install itself a few months ago, or is it the one that is going to come after people have unanimously agreed to move towards the same direction? Because I still wonder whether or not we have a government in the country. So therefore, my expectations right now may not be directed towards the one that Jacob is going to swear in May, but towards that government that is going to come in out of the will of the people. When you look at most of the current ongoing programs, you realize that there are certain policies and certain programs that the regime has put across, but they don't have the will, they don't have the patriotic heart to implement it. So I think as young people, the very first thing we need is the will, the goodwill. We need people who understand and who really resonate with our needs to be at the helm of the leadership and the implementation of the youth programs. Because when someone does not have the will, even if you have a good bill, a good policy, they are simply going to stay for it. We have seen several programs like the Youth Livelihood, like, yoga and so on, but they don't reach further because the people who are implementing them don't seem to have any attachment or interest towards seeing their country move forward. Because if we are having a country of young people, over 80%, like Jacob put across, and someone who is handling the youth programs is handling them without that attachment, it means they don't mean well for the whole country. So it stifles the whole thing. So to me, that is the first key thing we need. We need patriots with a strong will as young people. That's our first expectation. And then
we'll get to the depth of that. Let me get to Matanda. Also, you get to the audience, give us your take.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very glad to have my maiden appearance. I think I've appeared here on panels, but not on Civic Space TV. And I'm also glad to get an opportunity to interact with the colleagues here, all known to me. So to jump in the fray to weigh in on the number of issues that have come up. Number one, of course, as a member, I like identifying myself as an East African, and as a citizen of the East African community, our utmost condolences to the people of Tanzania for losing our president. And every time death happens, for me, and I want to implore that it becomes for all of us, it should be a lesson to us, especially those of us in leadership, that first, you are going to go at some point, and therefore, when you are gone, what remains is the legacy, what you did and did not do. And therefore, I don't understand sometimes when I see leaders speaking and behaving like they are not aware that this is a stage where we are just meant to play some role and move on. Secondly, I think that in the death, still in line with lessons, in the death of President Magufuli, as a member of the Alliance for National Transformation, I think his death asserts our continuous song that you cannot rely on an individual. You need to build institutions and systems that you can turn to, because all of us, anything, your leader could just be walking out and there's a plane crash or they are knocked. What then remains? Because we have also seen representations in this country that try to suggest that only one individual can fix all our problems, only one individual can ensure the stability of the country. Yet this is a human being. So we must all make efforts to build systems and institutions, just like we see how they are playing out in Tanzania. For Magufuli's legacy, I think that for me there's one very critical issue that Magufuli put out. When I interact with many people in this country around values and stamping out things like corruption, I realize many Ugandans have resigned to a point where they think this corruption is nature, that there's nothing you can do about it, you cannot stop it, it's how things are. I've even had some scholars, I think the leading is Andrew Mwenda, who keep saying, you know, corruption here, it will sort itself through evolution. A poor country cannot do without corruption. Corruption is how it works, not how it fails. And I think what stood out for me in his legacy was a demonstration that if the person at the top chooses, they can be able to fix some corruption, of course, maybe not entirely, but some corruption and wastage can be fixed. I think there was a very big point in some of his policies, like saying, why should the president and ministers keep flying out of the country, going to different capitals when they are ambassadors? Because every time you see that movement, taxpayers' money is being wasted. Yet we want to believe we are a poor society. When you're poor and you have little resources, more reason for you to be very sparing in how you spend those resources. So I think him showing that it's possible, if there is a will, to make sure that the little we have goes to critical sectors. And for that, I celebrate him. Of course, on the flip side, as a person who cares about human rights, I think that his record was becoming worse by the day, the way he was treating people who express other opinions. And you know that also, as much as some people think that way you can promote an economy, but an economy grows when the citizens realize their potential. And people cannot realize their potential in a restrictive environment where it's like they are living on gunpoint. You need to allow for ideas to flow, for people to realize their potential and then collectively build an economy. So I think his record withdrawing from the African Human Rights Court when it is hosted in Tanzania, making amendments to ban public interest litigation, to ban electoral petitions. Some of those were not very attractive, but like I say, we are all human. He has run his race, so we forgive him, but hope those who come after him can be able to draw lessons. To cross to our topic, which is about youth demands, like my sister, when I looked at the topic, I was not sure whether when you talk about the new government, I was not sure whether you're talking about what may be a product of what we just went through in January, or a new government whenever we shall get it. Because I don't think we have a new government yet. Since 1962, Uganda has had the unfortunate experience of failing to get a stable government, stable in the sense that the methods of getting power are clear. Every time we have gotten a president in Uganda, the outgoing is either dead or on the border running. And whereas some people think that transition is a matter of form, not substance. I've heard the president of this country saying, some of you focus so much on the who instead of focusing on the what. The two are actually mutually inclusive. The two work together. When people are not sure of what's going to happen after elections, for example, every time we are going to elections, there's capital flight, people run out of the country, people run to the countryside, people are not sure of what's going to happen. Whenever you have a leader who overstays, they are welcome, systems are compromised, the leader becomes an institution. So if you asked me what would be the demands or whether they are common interest of young people, I would say we need to go back to the fundamentals, because since 1962, we have not fixed governance, we have not fixed service delivery. If you're looking for rankings in education, if you're having world rankings, you start from the bottom. If you're looking for rankings in healthcare, if there are world rankings, please start from the bottom. If you're looking for rankings in an enabling environment for trade and industry, we have no primary industries in this country. Many of these so-called industrial parks are merely warehouses of goods. So right from the fundamentals, and I agree with Jacob on the point that when you talk about young people, you're talking about Uganda, because that's what is in Uganda. It's a very probably the second youngest country on earth. So for me, I think the demands for the young people are very basic. They are not even sophisticated. It is jobs, it is productivity. So until when that new government comes, they should ensure that we can have a stable government that's not based on individuals, but is based on systems and values. Secondly, the things around service delivery, and I've mentioned education, health, and an enabling environment for productivity, including things like rule of law. You see, sometimes people think that rule of law is just a human rights issue. But even issues as basic as a contract, issues as basic as property rights are hinged on the rule of law. I can only enter a contract and put there my money when I know, in case there's a dispute, to be enforced in court. If I know the system is broken, there is corruption, I have no chance, then I may look elsewhere to put my money. If I publish a book, or I release a song, and because there's no rule of law and protection of property rights, I'm not going to benefit from it. Why should I be innovative if there's even no incentive that my work, my innovation will be protected because there's no system, there's no enabling environment for that. Why would I be innovative? Why would I not run out of the country and go to another environment? Yeah, so for me, I think basically the demands of the young people are not very different. They are the very things of why a state exists, because I think we are still down there.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Ruth now, finally.
Yes, so thank you very much. I think it's very exciting for me to be sitting with politicians. I'm the only odd woman out. But thank you, Demian, for this space, and thank you for having me. I'm very excited, by the way, about the Civic Space TV, because I know it's a space where people can talk and and have their issues, but then also I know that other spaces do not really invite in young people. The Frontline, for example, I stopped even watching it. You never see a young person there, whether it is also NTV on the spot. But with the civic space, I can see that you're already creating spaces for young people to come and talk, and for that we celebrate you. So I work for a youth organization called the Youthline Forum, and we're a home of young people here in Uganda. And what we are trying to do is build a stronger youth sector in Uganda, a sector that is stronger and coordinated and can be able to talk about this, have these kinds of conversations, but also demand for better services. And but I think for me, when we think about this topic of what youth demands in the next government, I do not think that young people are ready to demand yet. I think for me, if they're able to demand, they should first organize themselves. And right now, I can comfortably say that as young people, we do not have that strong one voice, knowing that something that will affect me as Ruth Asiimwe, it will also affect Matanda. Knowing that if Matanda is arrested somewhere, as a young person, I should not be comfortable where I am. We are not yet there. We are not yet at a place where I hear, oh, there is an Olum maybe Gulu, and something has happened to him, and as a young person I'm concerned, somewhere, and I'm concerned that is not happening yet. Where you see there are kidnappings and young people are the first people to get out and speak, that is not happening yet. And as long as that is not happening, as long as young people we are not together, we are not organized, we are not speaking with one voice, we do not have that ability to demand yet. Or even when we demand, because we are all familiar with our government, maybe my senior colleague now that is in might not agree with me, but I think there are many people who will agree that the government is not yet ready to listen to young people, or even the government does not fear young people. So the day we organize ourselves and we start speaking with one voice, and the government starts getting scared, and that is the day we shall know that as young people then we can be able to demand. The day they go to pass a bill and they first ask, what are the young people talking? Find out from Matanda, find out from David, what are the young people saying? As long as the government is not doing that, that means we are not yet in that space where we pose a threat. And I think as I conclude on this topic, I was reflecting on the words of Muhammad Professor Mahmoud, actually. He was a professor at Makerere University. I was there listening to him one day, and he was talking about how students are this force, this catalyst force that government is so scared of, and they are the force that have the power to spur other groups into action. So as long as young people, we organize ourselves and we recognize actually that we are a force that can spur other people into action, then we shall be comfortable to make all the demands that we need. And conclusively on Magufuli, so I was in Tanzania 3 weeks ago, and this time I passed through Dar es Salaam. Every time I went to Tanzania, it was through Kilimanjaro in Arusha. So this time I passed through Dar es Salaam and I reached the airport. I was in shock. It is not the airport that I had seen five years ago. And as well as I was going to Tanzania as well, I was really doubting, these guys are saying they're middle income status now. I doubt their middle income status. But when I got there and I passed through the city of Dar es Salaam, I could see that Magufuli had done a good job. And as we interacted, we are trying to form a solidarity movement across the region, a solidarity movement that will ensure students in Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania are all speaking with one voice. So as we are interacting with the young people in Tanzania, the students, you could see they spoke highly of Magufuli. And when we went into the comfort, now we're comfortable and like, okay, what are your issues as young people here? And what is it that you can be able to speak about? They all went silent. None of them was comfortable speaking. We had a guild president there, and when he stood up to speak, the first thing he talked about was the government, and he talked government all through. None of them could speak anything about the government. And I think for me the question is, even as we celebrate Magufuli and we celebrate the developments, can that celebration continue at the expense of the gross human rights violations that we've all been talking about? And maybe that is not a conversation that we can go into the detail today, but that is a conversation that has been on each and every person's mind. Because even people, when you ask Magufuli, there's always a but. He did this but, however, things like that. So we need to be able to address the however. And finally, and this is going to be my last take on Magufuli, as seeing the different videos, on WhatsApp, people were crying, when Magufuli was being taken around. There was this particular short video I saw in Dodoma, when he was in Dodoma, and people were crossing over, the gates, like they really wanted to see, and they were really touched. And you could see that, yes, the president had died and people are touched. And then I thought about our own president here in Uganda, and I couldn't help but smile or imagine the situation, what it would be like. And I think for me, I would agree with Matanda, as you are a leader, you should know that time will come, and it can come sooner than we expect. He had just gotten elected in October, and his time has come. So all of us, as we lead in different spaces, and specifically the government, we should know that at a certain time, our time will come, and when that time comes, what is it that people will think and say, and how will they remember us? I will end it there.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Thank you. I think it's at this point that we now need to get down into the topical discussion. Yeah, the topical discussion today, and I want us to possibly by the end of the day, we should be able to agree whether we are at the same line, or whether we still have gaps as young people that we need to really fix by the end of the term or in the years to come. I think when I hear this conversation and the feedback coming from our neighbors, Tanzania, and what we are talking about, that so it's important that these are some of the things we need to reflect upon as young people and see that we have a better Uganda. Maybe I need to start with Jacob, because you did the first introduction, and you of course at this point everyone would say that you're much more in the more comfortable position, being that your party was announced as the winners of the just concluded elections. So I want to ask, what is your take on the just concluded elections, but also on the current political context where young people now are more at the receiving end? We are seeing abductions, we are seeing killings, and some people are calling them extrajudicial killings. What is your take on the current context?
Thank you. the first time I spoke, I had imagined that I was setting the pace. I didn't know that colleagues were having spears. They were pointing at me. And now I don't think starting with me is now for setting pace. Clearly not.
So being set up.
It is for being set up.
Being set up.
But again, with clarity, I think that in the previous question, something came up, and I want to start from there. Whether there is a government, which one? Because now you're asking me about being declared a winner. But people here are saying we are not sure if there is a winner.
No, he said
If there is
you
some,
declared yourselves a winner.
so you can imagine. But I want to start here. Whether the opposition wants it or not, there is a state in Uganda. And that state operates, and the only qualification for whether Uganda's positions are taken into consideration is twofold: the people of Uganda or the international community. If the international community recognizes the presence of a declared winner, then there's an international community that agrees that there's a government in Uganda. If the people of Uganda acknowledge that there is a winner, then there is a person or government in Uganda. The question of our contest, that we do not agree with how he won or something, is a discussion of quality. It's not a discussion of substance meriting whether there is a winner or not. And I want us to agree on that principle. Otherwise, we are going to keep young people in a spiral that is deceptive. The other day, for my brother Harris, his party leader declared himself the winner by 54% in what he called a public court. When he declared the winner, I thought the public then would come and jubilate now that they have announced the winner. But there was no jubilation on the announcement. He attempted it in the Supreme Court. I think that the Supreme Court did not go down well. There was lack of faith in the capacity of the Supreme Court to see things as basic as a clear win. So I felt like the deception is what keeps us away from what we need to work on. There are things I agree with. What happened in the previous election? Number one, let's start with the positives. It is the first election where the election is very strongly determined by young people. And we can miser our words and say, no, someone won the election, but the country is not one sub-region. The country is not one region. The country is bigger than one region. And for me, that acceptance would be a start to the politics that young people can influence political outcomes in Uganda. I think that the insistence that someone won the election is one of the problems we are having when we try to gather young people. They are saying now, this one from F.D.C, a young person, is saying now, I don't know whether there is a government or not, and that is how she is going to nurture political participation. Another one is saying, no, we won, but I wonder why we're not being the declared ones. For him, he's also taking young people in that direction. I think that for us to have progressive youth participation in Uganda, we need to let the dying die, and we need to start the new dawn. There are things I agree on, and there are things I would love to engage to going forward. Is it right for government to abduct people based on whom they support? Certainly not. Is it right for a state to abduct people who do not come up for trial in 48 hours? It is against our laws. These are the things where we can have consensus. But if that consensus is built on the backdrop that they are being arrested because they support these people who won, then you have a challenge with me, because now I need to first agree or disagree with you on whether you have legitimacy in what you're saying before we address the legitimate concern of whether young people that are being taken in are having due process. For me, that's where my challenge is with my colleagues, and I hope that the opposition going forward at least the one led by young people who are educated, who can reason out things better, can begin to see where our efforts have much more impact in participation terms than continuing the rhetoric, which is passed on as an opposition way of doing things. For me, that is where I depart. Now, when I say that young people made the biggest impact in the previous election, it's not just for the opposition, it's for both sides. When you look at the percentage that His Excellency Bobby Wine, as he is called in the ghetto, the Honorable Robert Chagulanyi, got in Uganda, it had to take the participation of youth of Buganda in that line to garner up that support for him. When you look at what the president got away from Buganda, it had to take the participation of youth of those regions to garner what he got. There are definitely some irregularities, and this is confirmed by the statements of the two principals, that Bobby Wine says there was rigging, and the president says that every Ugandan knows that there was rigging. It's just that they differ on who did the rigging. I think that it's therefore clear that everyone feels like there's a problem with the election that needs to be addressed, and we can have a conversation on what address looks like or redress looks like. And I think that for me, engaging immediately on those long-term foundations for Uganda post-election are more relevant than the continuation of this scripted way of acting in opposition, that you first reject the election and election results, then you say we are going to hold demonstrations, then you come and demonstrate alone, no one shows up, then you go back and say, you see, the people are scared. We are not laying firm foundations that will check many of these things, and you will realize that even when we get out, NRM, God forbid that we get out, that if we got out of power and someone else got into power, the system continues. Why? Because it's the way we are normalizing election behavior. The election is not the event of the day. It is a process. It starts with how people think they're supposed to participate, how they are mobilized to participate, how they eventually participate, and how they treat the outcomes of their participation. For me, that is the principle. And I think that the young people that I lead in Uganda in these 5 years will have a very big say on how elections will happen. And I want to invite my young friends here to be a part of the conversation that is progressive. Not that I do not see the evils, but I'm saying the approach we give to the evils of Uganda can determine whether we are just being glossy or we are actually addressing the evils. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacob. I know I would have loved to invite Akampulira in there, but let me start with Joyce, because of course for you from the National People's Assembly and the F.D.C. I don't know whether you have instances where you have young people who are missing in your party, and what is your general take on that, and also the just concluded elections? You already denied that we don't have a legitimate government.
Thank you very much. And I'll start from the legitimacy and the government and responding to people. You see, a government in a democratic society is something that they say it is a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Now, not winning an election does not mean there is a government. You can win elections and you remain in a country without a government because of the way the election has been managed. And government.
Invite her to repeat that statement.
And government has several arms. There is a legislature, there is the judiciary, there is the executive, and the other institutions. So in a situation where you cannot differentiate between the judiciary, between the legislature and the cabinet, you fail to understand if it is still called the government, and that is the situation we have here. That when you're going to court, you don't know whether you're going to State House in Entebbe or you're going to a judicial court where you're going to be charged genuinely based on the constitution. When you're going to parliament and you have a bill as a young person, you don't know whether it is going to be analyzed and passed in the interest of the young people, or it is going to be passed in the interest of the state, the state house, and maybe a few individuals within the state. So it is on that ground that we say there is no clear government in the country that we are in. Because if a person has the head, the nose, the arms, and then this person, you find something straight, it has no arms, it has no leg, so is it still a person, or it is something that looks like a person? So what we have here looks like a government, it isn't. So we need to first have a government of the people for the people. A government for the people does not kidnap and kill other people, so that others whom they have selected can enjoy. So I hope you appreciate the reason why we are not sure whether we have a government in our country or not. And I hope it is addressed very clearly. On the issue of elections, yes, I don't really think we had an election, first of all. We had simply a selection process that we went into a ceremonial event to fulfill the constitutional mandate that after 5 years, Ugandans should have an election. I think that's what we had. Because from way back when the process started, other players were not allowed to operate. Other candidates wanted to consult, they were not allowed. Constitutional, they even went to court order that they should be allowed. They went to the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission gave them permission to go and consult and start the electoral process in their political parties, and they were all denied. Honorable Chairperson of the N.U.P was denied all the chances. He did not consult anywhere. The F.D.C was tear-gassed all over the place everywhere we went. We did not have any way of preparing. So it was not an election. And that affirms the reason why we are saying there is no government yet. Because if a government we are supposed to have in our country is supposed to come through an election, then the election process should be clear. People should understand that this is an election and this is how it is conducted. Not when a certain presidential convoy is fully bundled up and arrested so that he remains alone without a car to move, and then you're saying you're in an election. Not when the young people are targeted. My sister here said she believes we are not yet united as young people and we don't have a voice. That one I agree with her 100%. But somewhere where I partially don't agree yet, maybe we shall discuss further, is whether or not the government fears young people. Because from the events that have happened during the elections, you realize that the government was so scared of young people that many people were arrested and are now in prison, Shitalia and other prisons, simply because they were young. There is no crime they committed. They were not even organizing any activity. Some of them are not even into the political circles. But because every time they see a young person, they are suspicious that that young person could be a supporter of the opposition, they will arrest. So I think the government is really scared of the young people and only tries to make sure that the young people don't unite because they are scared. So they will get a few like Jacob and tell Jacob, we are giving you 10 billion, go and mobilize your colleagues, give them this money. So you find you get divided into that. Should we take the money or should we continue demanding for our own things? So the state, yes, is scared of the young people and it uses certain mechanisms to keep dividing us so that we don't unite and fight with one voice. And in the election process, all the opposition youth were denied the chance to participate in the youth elections, the structures. It was conducted like an NRM primary. Most of our youth were denied a chance to just get nominated. You go to the sub-county and they tell you the Electoral Commission has not started nominating. You go back the following day, they chase you. Then before you know it, the NRM candidate has gone through unopposed. And that is how we ended up with the structure of the youth, which is like an NRM youth league structure from top up to parliament. And what are they doing as them? When they won the election, the first press conference they held, they were not talking about the issues of the young people. They said, for them, they are ready to crush N.U.P youth and to prove to them that N.U.P does not, to prove to this country that N.U.P does not have young people, and the opposition, which has been boasting around the issue of young people, does not have it. And I was asking myself, these are newly elected members of parliament.
I was trying to remember when I held
to
that
lead
press
the youth.
conference. But
They are
just
holding the
clarify.
first press conference to just speak about N.U.P. And yet the previous day, a lot of young people had been arrested. Actually, that's the previous day. They did not speak about the arrests. So I think we'd still have a very long way to go, and we did not really have an election. We need to have a transition kind of government system right now and reorganize elections. And it is from there that we shall then have a government to whom we shall put these expectations that we are raising here. That is purely my opinion.
Okay. Thank you very much, Joyce. I want. I know you, Akampulira will come last on this one because I see you have the fire in there. But I would want to bring in Matanda. You know, Matanda, you're so much active with your president. You're running around the country, traversing the country, looking for votes. You're so much active into this trade. What is your experience also, but also in light with the current situation now, where you see we are experiencing the abductions and all that is happening, the security threats around young people that is pushing them to the walls. What do you think?
So your question has two strands. One around my participation on the nature of the election, and then the current goings on. So one on the election, I honestly are hesitant to describe what we just went through as an election. And I agree with Jacob when he says an election is not just the polling day. That there are so many things that would qualify an election to be credible, to be fair and fair as described by our constitution. The idea really about elections, when you read our first article in our constitution, is that the people of Uganda, choose who governs them and how, in accordance with the law. And free and fair is not a redundant addition or prefixed to be fair. The constitution could have said there will be regular elections. But the framers of the constitution, having consulted the people, said free and fair. So I agree with him that an election is not just the polling day. That means before you go to an election, for it to be credible, you'd expect, for instance, to have access to the citizens and present themselves to you. Like, for instance, when I sat down and analyzed the activities I engaged in with my presidential candidate, General Mugisha Muntu. So first of all, there was this regulation from Electoral Commission that you can only meet 200 people at a time within slightly above 2 months. I sat down and calculated, and if you followed that logic within those days, you would have met less than 10,000 people by the end of the campaign. The register had 17 million, then later it looked like 19. There was also a clash on the actual numbers. But imagine meeting 10,000 people of 18 million. Of course, there's the whole issue of saying you can work through agents and all that. But if you're choosing a head of state, a fountain of honor, it's in your interest to make sure that as many citizens as possible interact with this person, get to hear and listen from them. Of course, some of these things were deliberate, knowing that there's a person who has been there for over 3 decades, so they need no introduction. So just use a lot of excuses like COVID. I think COVID was a real threat, but I think it was used as an excuse. And how the state infrastructure behaves now and how it was behaving before the election can tell you or can demonstrate the behavior. So where first that in itself was a problem. Secondly, prior, even right from consultation, before even we went into COVID, our constitution forces a situation where someone who is going to run for president carries out consultations. You see that in this country that has been effectively banned. As a member of an opposition political party, I know that it's a very big struggle in this country to hold any rally, any meeting, or even make an appearance on radio. There are several times when we booked spaces on radio because they said it's going to be digital, and then just before the show you get a call that it has been cancelled. You know? Why? Because people are being intimidated. Who are you? Why are you hosting an opposition person in this space? So for me, right from the fact that we cannot organize, if you have a contrary view, you cannot organize. And earlier on, you know, he said, whether, Jacob said, whether opposition accepts or not, we must accept there is a state in Uganda. And when I heard that, in my mind I was like, yes, therein lies the problem. Because the state is supposed to be independent of all these contestations. A state does not go away, it's always there. A state denotes a permanent population. A state denotes known boundaries. A state denotes certain infrastructure for coercion, like the army, like police, that are supposed to stand over and above the government, because the government is just a component of the state. So what we contest here is not the state. Of course it looks like it's the state because here it is fused. There's no difference between the government and the state. But what we should aspire to have is to have a state that is divorced. If I'm the commander of the armed forces, just like we have seen in Tanzania, I should be able to salute Mwalimu Nyerere. He goes, I easily salute His Excellency Hassan Mwinyi, Mukapa, and they go and it's okay. Here, even before the elections, we are seeing armed officers declaring that, how I cannot, you think we fought to end up with this? We cannot salute or honor. That's now the state getting fused with the government. So what we are expressing here, the statements you see that we do not accept the outcome, we are going to demonstrate, those are just expressions to tell you that the government is not legitimate. Maybe not the state, but the government is not legitimate. And I think what you're asking us to do is to, after such a sham, to just pretend for what you call progressive discourse. So we just pretend that no, it's okay. Now let's have this government. If you get used to that kind of situation, it means we shall get used to the system, which hitherto, of course, has been happening since 1962, of capturing the state by any means possible, and then it's accepted, and nobody expresses the fact that what exists is not legitimate. About the kidnaps, it's unfortunate, it's very unfortunate that still, and here if I can think like an East African, there was a time, especially after 1995, when Uganda was a model on having a very progressive constitution and a very progressive constitutional government. And we made so many gains, especially around our chapter 4 of the constitution. Because basic things like being charged within 48 hours when you have been arrested, basic things like being held in a place that is gazetted, those things seem small, but they're the very fiber of what an accountable and progressive government looks like. Where we are now, actually in the region, we are now, the little gains we had made, it's like we made one step forward, now we are making 2 steps backwards, arresting people, charging civilians in the court martial, holding people in ungazetted places, shooting carelessly, because one of the things we have grown up celebrating was that, you know, the army has been professionalized and all that. Of course now you can only say that with a pinch of salt. So I think that as young people there again, there lies, of course, democracy and progressiveness is not something that, like climbing a mountain, that you reach the summit and you say, yeah, now it is done. It is something we have to keep struggling for. Now that this is happening, where we are in a state where we are depreciating into even on small things, where we seem to have covered some traction, it's incumbent upon us as citizens, as young people, to fight and restore the progression of moving on. Otherwise, if a minister can stand on the floor of parliament and say, I have the honor and privilege to table a list of the people who have been abducted by the government, then that just shows you that, oh my God, we are now just moving back on the little gains we had made, rather than moving forward. So the abductions, the fear mongering, the fact that the criminalizing of expressing contrary opinions, of course, is unfortunate and must be resisted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matanda. I think it's about this time that we will go for a short break. But before the short break, I think when we get back from the break, I want us to, N.U.P is heavily affected into this, and the part has been crying so far. Yes, but I want us to come back in the second segment, so where we'll have quite an extensive discussion on this same line. Thank you very much, viewers. Let us go for this short break and get back to you. We are following, this discussion is running online on our Twitter handle. The hashtag is ChatShowUG. You can follow there and follow the discussion. We are live there. Also on Facebook, we are live. YouTube, we are live. Let's go for this short break. I'm your host, Demiano Masesa, for the Citizens Chat Show. Thank you very much.
The Citizens Chat Room happens every Friday at 2 p.m. on Civic Space TV Online on Facebook and YouTube. We invite you to be part of this conversation. Civic Space TV, freedom always.
Welcome back from the short break. This is this Citizen Chat Show that goes on every Friday, 2 to 4 p.m. From the break, I think we had quite off-camera discussion that was a little exciting. But I think we need to bring it back on the table. An extension from where we started from, or where we ended from. Quickly and briefly, I want to invite in Ruth before Harris. I want to invite in Ruth. Just chip in a little, and I definitely then get to Akampulira.
Okay, so thank you very much. I think my colleagues have already shared a lot on the election, so I'll be very brief. And in summary, we all know, and I think we can agree that the election was a scam. And we saw it coming from the time Vyamukama was put at Electoral Commission, and then to the time we started tabling electoral reforms. I know as civil society were heavily involved. We had so many reforms and kept on advocating for those reforms, but the government kept on ignoring the reforms. And then, of course, we went to the campaign period, and of course, my colleagues have already talked about how the different candidates were treated, not just as at presidential level, even right down in the villages. You find that the incumbent is in a church, giving out bread and talking to people. Churches are closed because of COVID, but he's there talking to people. And then the opposition candidate in the same district cannot even go and stand somewhere and put up a poster. Just putting up a poster. So that's how bad it was, and that's the double standards that we saw. And I think for me, this is something that was expected. I do not expect less from the NRM government. We saw it coming. That's what they've always done when it comes to times of elections. And I think this time what was more clearer than the past elections is the military takeover. I was in Fort Portal 3 days or 2 days before the election, and you saw how the military was being assembled, even in the smallest districts, and you're like, we are going to an election sincere. Why should the military even be deployed, even in the smallest district? Not that it's supposed to be deployed in Kampala, but this time it was too much. And of course, when people in the village, they see the military, the fear, the intimidation. And on the election day, I was at a certain polling station, and I saw this army man with a big gun, just going round. And then he went to the next polling station, and he went to the next polling station, and that is what we are calling an election. And I think I'll also talk briefly about the youth election, because I'm passionate about the youth election, and I was heavily involved, especially the election of the youth MPs. It was a marketplace. Like, you're going to the market, you're buying, and you're selling. And I saw the young people who were part of that election, the electoral college, and how they were being bribed and voted and all that. And it was really sad what really happened in that youth election. I think as a youth sector, we are happy, and we are able to get Jacob. And Jacob, really want to congratulate you, because I know what it is that we lost during that youth election, whether it is at a National Youth Council or at the youth MPs, but at least we are happy that we had you come out of that. But the kind of election that happened, even with the election from that election, at least we are very privileged to have Jacob, because he's very.
It could get worse.
Very
That's what you say.
he's very progressive. I think we can agree that he's progressive. We could have gotten worse. And I think I'll conclude on the elections to really appreciate the young people. Really, I think as Jacob said, this time the young people embraced this election. They participated. They offered themselves as electoral candidates. Some of them were voted out. There were a few that won. We saw them at every level, whether it is at observation or as polling agents. So those, of course, were putting up papers and all that, posters and all that. But I think this time the young people participated in this election, and we have to recommend them for that participation. And I think as we move past the election is what happens next. The people that we have elected, how do we hold them accountable? And how do we support the young people who are there, who are in those positions? How do we work better with them? How do we support them? And those of us who did not go through, and we know that the challenge that the current government we're having, how is it that we work better and together as young people to maybe have a better election 5 years from now? And on the kidnappings, I think everyone has already painted how sad it was. I want to recall, I was here on Tuesday, that was yesterday, and Sarah gave us an example. It was a very clear example, and I really want to borrow her words of Nigeria. Nigeria, they have this terrorist group, Boko Haram, which is kidnapping people. And the government is fighting Boko Haram from kidnapping its people. And you come to Uganda, the government that is supposed to protect us, to protect its people, it's just its mandate to protect its people. It is the same government that is kidnapping and hurting and abducting people. How more sad can that be? And let's just reflect on that. And I think it's a wake-up call for all of us to know that we are on our own, and we need to work together and get better. Because if our own government can do that to its own people, then we need to start thinking through how else do we get either better government in place, or how do we work for ourselves and get better. I will end it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Maybe finally on that, I would want to invite in to bring in Akampulira. N.U.P really had the most exciting run onto these elections. I think we need to agree on that. And but then at the end of the day, you are then crying more foul of being witch-hunted, or these abductions are more on your door. What is your take, really?
Demiano, I'd like to pick it up from where Comrade Ruth stopped. You know, as early as the 17th century, a group of Britons who are tired of arbitrary arrests, capricious disappearance of citizens, came together to force the monarchy to make sure that there would be trial by fellow men, that they would mark the end of arbitrary disappearance of people. And that's how we see the appearance of what we call in law the writ of habeas corpus. Produce dead or alive. It was serious. That is in around the 17th century. That's more than 300 years ago. So many years ago, the British community took that resolve, and that gave birth to one of the most remarkable documents in the history of government and constitutionalism, the Magna Carta. And here we are in Uganda, and it is the order of the day. I have a young girl, and every time I leave home, I look at her, I hug her, and I ask God, is this the last time I'm going to see my girl? I look into the eyes of my wife, and I tell her, pray for me. Not because I am a criminal, not because I am not a law-abiding citizen, but simply because of my political thoughts, simply because of my political association. I have to live a fearful life. And I have to be very, very honest today that I have never felt fearful for my life like I have since the last 6 months. Many of my colleagues who I was with in the N.U.P have died. Frank Senteza, who was run over by a military vehicle. 2 days before, I was sharing a room with him in Mbarara. This young man called Ashraf Kasiri, and so many guys whose kneecaps, whose body parts have been removed, who have disappeared. All these are people who are close to me. But when you go back to Hobbes, and he's talking about the fundamental role of government, the reason why citizens should submit to any government, any force of law, the cardinal role of any government anywhere in the world is security of its citizens. For the West, they have even expanded the definition of security to go beyond security of the person and property to include diseases. When in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, the US Parliament and House of Commons in the UK, they defined COVID, the fight against COVID as a war against that disease, because anything that hurts the citizens of those states, of those nations, is regarded as a security threat. But here you have a government which wakes up and they even pride in making sure that the population knows that if you speak up, if you're of a different opinion, there are consequences, there's a price to pay. That is a very unfortunate state for the young people of this country to find ourselves in. And of course, this brings me to comments by Jacob, his commentaries on the nature of the election we had, his justifications on whether or not we have a state or a legitimate government in Uganda. And I'll tell you, colleagues, that in 1971, people who sustained dictatorships of Amin, of Obote, were brilliant young guys, talented. When you look at Binaisa, that was extremely talented. In political science, we have a term we call preference falsification. So what is preference falsification? You go against your conscience. You know that the action you're taking is not in consonance with your beliefs. So the big group in the NRM is there not because they think this government has anything new to offer, but because they are on a job. And that's why I still go back to my definition of government in Uganda. A small group of people who have come together to eat on behalf of others. So these preference falsifiers, unfortunately, one of my first recruits, Eyeru Jacob, is a preference falsifier. We have so many lawyers around who are preference falsifying. What do we need to do? I don't know. The kind of, it's a challenge. Jacob will come here and we kind of, to a gullible mind, give plausible arguments in support of the government. And he's doing so much damage using his talent. And that's why I feel very bad that Jacob is not part of us. That's why I feel very bad whenever I see talented people speaking for the regime. They give it sustenance. They give it a shade of morality. They try to sanitize it. They are sanitizers. So as young people, we must reject for once this kind of smoralization of national issues and say, no, the next 30 years in Uganda must be great years of socio-economic transformation, but also respect for human rights. Without respect for human rights, guys, I don't think that there is any government worthy of its name. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Akampulira. I think we need to end to that. I think you're almost getting us emotional. But let's get back to the debate. Okay, now let me get to this. To Parliament, is the current representation of young people in Parliament sufficient?
I don't know how people look at it, but when you look at the Parliament we have, the problem we have is not the numbers of young people in Parliament. The problem we have is what those young people are doing in Parliament. By law, the young people have 5 representatives in Parliament, whom they elect through the sham process that Jacob just explained to us, that through the NRM party structure process. So we end up with 5 people to represent young people. But when they go there, they don't represent the young people. Like I mentioned earlier, in the very first press conference of the youth MPs who had been elected, since they were all NRM, they only went there on their yellow charts to declare how they are going to crush the young people of the opposition. And they did not mention the state violence that is ongoing on the young people. They did not list down at least 10 things that they were going to do as the youth MPs on behalf of the young people, even of NRM who had elected them. So you find that the representatives we have in Parliament don't know why they are there. Oh, they know, but it is not their interest. For them, they are there to earn a monthly salary and to serve the political party, which takes them through the sham process, which that is the NRM. Because even within the NRM, I don't see the youth getting any better services. I would say maybe when they have programs or when they're advocating for issues, they only look at the young people of their political party. But the young people of the NRM are not any different from the young people of the F.D.C and the N.U.P and any other political party, or those that are not affiliated. Recently we had some conference, and it was for different political organizations. So I went there to represent the F.D.C, and each one of us, each political party was fronting 5 youth. The youth who came from the NRM side were all much worse than us of the opposition. In terms of everything, they don't have jobs, they look frail and pale, they don't know what is going on in the party. To be honest, they don't know what is going on in the party. They don't know.
Chairperson, at least you've had. So
they don't know. They don't know. They don't have. They don't have contacts. When it was time for presenting contacts, did you meet? Because we're supposed to meet our party leaders to give feedback on key issues, but they don't have a single contact of their party leaders.
Yeah.
They cannot reach their party chairman. They can't reach the secretary general. Maybe they can take some months to reach Jacob. So that is how bad the representation of youth in Uganda is.
Okay, thank you. A quick one to Matanda. You're a lawyer, but also involved so much in politics, of course. I want to understand, how can we best measure youth political participation and the policy influence?
Measure? That's a technical one. But first of all, before we even measure, I think we need to understand the environment in which we operate. So even for different political parties, like she has stated, we need to understand that we live in a gerontal society where it is thought that the older, the wiser, and the background of African society is that youth and women did not own the means of production. So they did not own land, cows, money. So now it may not be cows or land, well, of course land, but the same reality still exists. So the young people not owning the means of production, and then also the belief system that the older the better young people being told, why are you running for its council? You're still young. You can come back 10 years after. Why can't you go for youth MP, the 5 slots? So that kind of environment, I think, diminishes the quality of participation. But more than that, I think in the last 3 decades, something terrible has happened in this country in terms of human capital development. You know, we keep talking about jobs only as a measure, but recently I was reading a World Bank report and I was shocked to find that 3% of children in Uganda are stunted. Getting stunted is like the worst state, but that means even the others who are not necessarily stunted may not have any better cognitive abilities. That I can tie it in with the civic consciousness. In like the last 5-10 years, I've advocated for student participation and youth participation. But I must tell you, I'm also aware that our quality of participation is miserable, and I would blame it on that failure of human capital development. So whether you want to look at it as in terms of education or institutions of family and schools and the curriculum, but whatever it is, the quality of participation, like in the previous election, many people have applauded the participation of young people, and I agree. I think the participation this time, both in terms of contesting and supporting and voting, was higher. And I think some credit goes to the People Power movement for interesting young people. I found young people in spaces, you know, like at a border stage or in a disco hall. Young people who hitherto would never discuss politics were now interested in following what's going on in parliament, what's happening. Someone said the ghetto has gone to parliament. Yeah. So I think that was a good job done to draw them. But now they are quality. I tell you, in this just concluded election, I saw posters of young people running for non-existent positions. I saw a young person running for Woman MP Kawempe. I saw many people in Kayunga running.
I would like to look at that poster. Kawempe is quite at the helm of politics in Uganda. Yes. I beg to disagree.
I saw a number of young people in the district of Kayunga running to become MPs of sub-counties. And some of them, of course, even approached our party, and then we had to, educate them a bit to say, there is no parliamentary representation for a person from the sub-county. But even for those who knew the right position to run for, many of them may not necessarily know what roles they need to play as leaders, or even those running, for example, councillor positions. Many of them are easily manipulated by the technocrats and all that. So for me, to answer your question of measuring, I think there are 2 strands that we can use to measure and conclude that the situation is miserable. One is the quality of participation, awareness of what's going on. Like, for example, in that parliament, the young members of parliament who are there, when these loans, when money is changing hands, are they able to comprehend, read the auditor's report and be able to say that, oh, here there's a problem? Or do they just chorus? This is like a choir. So one level is that, and which I blame on us. As young people, we need to liberate ourselves. So the country has disappointed us. We cannot afford to disappoint ourselves. But the other is to measure it using what you would call, when it comes to decisions that matter. Like Jacob here is our chairperson of the National Youth Council. When it comes to the decisions that really matter to the country, and that's distribution of resources, that's taking decisions. For example, right now, is it in our interest to keep bars and the music industry and the entertainment industry closed, knowing that the young people are most affected, while politicians are having rallies, while everything else is happening normally, but there is a sector which has so many young people that is closed? Do young people, whether member of parliament or Jacob here, do we have the power? Are we on the table where we can raise such an issue and see that there is action? Like my sister here said, that when there is a serious issue, when people sit of course our cabinet, the average age is up there, but even when it's above 60, do they think about how young people will respond to this, or what the view of young people is? And I think the answer is no. Like she said, government does not fear us. Maybe fear may not be the most appropriate word, but I mean, we are not there. You have no consequence. You can't do anything.
Thank you. That's where I need to chip in. I need to bring in Jacob and the issue of youth capital development. But the question here would be now, the young people, can we really see that we can draft a common agenda for the next 5 years? But also, can we see that there are some linkages into these from the different shades here that we've seen that can advance into the next 5 years?
Thank you. The Republic of Kenya is preparing for an election, and I have lost count of how many times different politicians have been affiliated with different political parties or formations. The moral there is that it is very possible for you to come together and revisit how you win without losing why you ran. And I think for me, this previous election was the starting point. That youth should understand that they are a part of Uganda in every sense, not in the sense of you are young people or you are children, or in every sense, the sense that you can determine everything and you must participate in the determination of everything. The problem I see is the attempt to make young people homogeneous. And say that we should behave in a particular way because we are young, we should support a particular thing because we are young. I don't think that it is the same reason we will advance when we are no longer young, to say that now that we are all old, let us support a particular thing or let us stand for a particular position. I think that basing any of our advances on our biology is a big problem. It limits our capacity as young people to understand the importance of the things we are doing and just first lift them to, because we are young, let us do things this way. For me, it is inappropriate. So, to come to your question, therefore, can we muzzle a common agenda? I think that the common agenda, first of all, for every Ugandan should be development. And that development should be across the board, whether it's human capital development, infrastructure development, or tax-based development. That development should be across the board. And I think whatever the necessity, we must participate. In fact, for me, I will not pretend of a National Youth Council that does not participate. The country is talking about a budget, and for us, we are quiet. The country is talking about roads, and we are not discussing the corruption in the roads. I don't think that that's what I'm going to pretend of. I think that we need to change so that young people can understand, with our contribution as their leaders, that they too have voices that can count. I'll shock you. While I am the chairperson of the National Youth Council and perhaps have the biggest youth legitimacy to speak, I am not, in protocol terms, the youngest person with power. The youngest MP in Parliament, the 11th Parliament, is 24 years of age, and he comes from the National Unity Platform. I listened to him on a recent TV show, and I could tell that he is an asset for young people if we understand that's a platform where we can give faith to youth being MPs, not as youth MPs, but as actual MPs in this country, which is young. Because when you look at it, it doesn't matter whether you are 18 or you are 89, you're all qualified to be members of parliament if you have senior certificates. And if the minimum qualification is that, then the country has a consensus on capacity at senior 6. So why don't young people who can come forth and compete? For me, that is my first level. We must deal with the intention of young people to compete. When we deal with the intention of young people to compete, then we say, when you're competing, you're not coming to offer leadership to youth. You're coming to offer leadership to Uganda, even when it's a young country. And that viewership of the mind of a young person will take us away from the challenge we have. I can give you the challenge we had in my elections, for example, is that people don't believe that I'm even under 30. People just say, so and so has to edit the age to come back young, so they can run to represent young people. Why? Because we have told the youth, or taught the youth, that they are supposed to be representatives of youth and not of Uganda or the development agenda of Uganda, which I think they can lead. To respond to one of the issues that my sister raised, I think that for me generally, political parties will not cease to exist as long as there's a multi-party dispensation. There's a National Peasants Party. I don't know what its membership is, but if it was a membership of Ugandans, it would have perhaps 68% of Ugandans. But they don't have that number of membership. But they're a legitimate political party. So I think that we should not look for homogeneity in political ideas. We should look for an acceptance of participation levels first, that we have a basic minimum, that we must have this number of youth who are elected, who are registered voters participating actively. Then we must have those who are in positions of power actually taking up their stance. And I want, you'll hear our next press conference. We want government to be filled with these youth who have come in, whether it's in the NRM or in N.U.P. I don't mind if the 24-year-old is given the leader of opposition position and he is asked to prove his worth. Because if we can give it to Betty Awolo Chan, why can't we give it to that young man? I think that generally the basic minimum is met by all of them being in parliament. So for me, I think we should challenge ourselves.
Thank you. Now to Ruth. I want to quickly, if you can respond to the fact that what can the parliament, government, political parties, and you, the civil society, do to increase young women and possibly the men's participation in politics? And do you have any good examples of good practices that you can share?
Yes, so thank you very much. Allow me just use 10 seconds to comment about human capital development and say that for sure the government does not prioritize human capital development, and it is on the list of their agenda because they know they have a young population. The moment they invest in improving this young population, then their interests will go away. So issues around human capital development is not part of the government's agenda, even when it is all over the government documents, including the NDPs. Now, for what we can be able to do, and I really talk from a civil society standpoint, and even get your point on which model can we borrow. And surprisingly, I will recommend that we borrow the NRM model in terms of developing people to get into politics. And what the NRM model looks like is they will go to the universities and they will identify students who are very progressive. First year, second year, they will identify them, they will nurture them. The next time you'll hear that certain students have gone to Chankwanzi, and before you know, the time they are coming out, they are totally brainwashed. I saw this happening.
Akampulira is really shocked.
Yes, it actually happens. I saw it happening to my brother. He was a very brilliant lawyer, and he goes to Chankwanzi, and then they see he's good, and then together with others they take them to Rwanda, and then before we know it, he's coming back and talking like Andrew Mwenda. And then he's justifying some of the issues he has just been against. And we see this with lots of young people who are very progressive. You see them, they're progressive, and before you know it, the government has taken them. They are nurturing them, they're changing them, and then they're in front of us and they're pro-government, and you really get disappointed. And I think that is the kind of model that for us as civil society we can be able to copy. Even political parties, you sit down as a party, as the chairperson of the National Youth League, and in your various capacities, you identify who is where, whether it is in the village or at the university or in different spaces or even private sector. How do we get them on board? How do we nurture them? And of course, we do not have the capacity of taking them to Chankwanzi. It can even be identifying some of the people that are progressive. God Badumshan, for example, take them and spend a week with him, nurture them, and knowing that in the next 5 years, there are this group, this caliber of leaders that we are growing, and these are the leaders that we are going to work with. We are going to promote them on media everywhere so that that people start to see them. We're going to give them opportunities. We're going to give them space. We're going to assign them mentors and coaches that will walk the journey with them. And when it comes to 3 or 4 years from now, we are going to put them and support them in their political aspirations. And at the end of the day, we shall even give them money to, because we know how the election is. You can't run it without money. So all these things, we sit and plan and do them. And that can be possible. If we copy that kind of model, we shall be able to have the kind of leaders that we have if we are purpose and thoughtful and very, very targeted into supporting them to get better and get where they are.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Possibly, in conclusion, I would want to get to Akampulira. Maybe finally, I would want to pick a second from 1 or 2 people to chip in. What can the youth do to fight the ongoing human rights violations? But also, how can they unite behind a common voice to have their agenda be heard in the next 5 years?
Thank you, Demian. Before I answer the question, I think it's important for the young people of Uganda to understand the context in which they operate, especially to appreciate to the fullest of extent the erosion of civic space and freedoms of expression and human rights violations that take place in this country. I'll give you a quick example. We recently elected, and elected is in big quotes, the 5 representatives of the young people to parliament. And you can't see, I haven't seen any statement anywhere on the ongoing human rights violations, on the kidnaps, on the tortures, and the most affected people are the young people they represent. The principle of representative democracy is you are a representative of even those who didn't elect you. So even when the most affected are mainly from the opposition, these 5 youth representatives, both those who are in there and those who are incoming, do represent young people, but you will not hear anywhere where they are talking about the human rights abuses. And that is, of course, that doesn't exclude the National Youth Council. But when Tanzania were unlucky, I don't know whether they were unlucky and their president died, the youth leaders in Uganda have been at the High Commission of Tanzania. They have been at the High Commission and they are condoling with Tanzania. They have sent letters to Zanzibar. They have done so many things, And on his agenda, the National Youth Chairperson and his team, they are planning on filling positions. But I have not had any component on human rights abuses. I don't know whether the African is antithetical to human rights, that it is okay. Those are issues which can slip under the carpet. I hope it is not. That we don't really pay attention. And I would like to implore all my colleagues, including Jacob, who is my very good friend, that human rights violations are not political issues. They should be things we do not politicize. For me, I thought that this would have been a moment where we come together across political lines and say, no, this is an extreme we cannot cross.
Maybe he's speaking some lessons.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I don't know. But for me, I think that every young person in this century, and I quickly respond to what Jacob said, because he somehow, I think, interprets our usage of the phrase "we are the majority, young people." He interprets it in a very narrow sense. He limits it to biological. For us to be, attributes it to the biological aspects of being a young people. No, when we use that phrase, we use it in a sense that we are most likely to share values within a certain age bracket. That the stereotypes, the prejudices of the group of Museveni, the 86th generation, their prejudices, their bad mannerism, their bad habits are most likely to be completely different from us of the 21st century. And we think that because we espouse almost the same ideas, we are almost affected the same way as a group, there is a political incentive for us to fight together so that we give a chance to these ideas. I think that we are on the same page, Jacob, because I get a feeling that you rather interpret it narrowly. So what can we do? We have to fight. We have to fight. There is an incentive for the regime to systematically and on a wide scale implement fear or to kidnap people. It works for them because they want power. They are saying that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. They are drunk on power. And I can tell this regime wouldn't stop at anything. They will do anything to make sure that they keep themselves in power. The project is sustenance of power. So what we need to do, some are long term, some are short term. In the long term, spaces like this, yes. Public legal education, yes. Civic education on a wide scale to the young people, yes. And I can assure you, and I want to use the example of the last election, that availability of information and sensitization works against the regime. It doesn't, the dictatorship doesn't thrive in such an environment. Whereas in the central region, the votes were overwhelming in favor of Bob Wine. And I know that some people would like to attribute that to tribal factors. No way. It was because the level of civic education in the central region is higher than anywhere else. For example, you wouldn't vote for people in the central region. These are people who have a wide exposure to media. But in Western Uganda, people were voted for. That is the biggest insult. Go to Isinjiro, go to Chiruhura, go to Kazo, go to Ibanda. People were voted for. You would come and they tell you, no, Mr. Jacob Eyeru, you're most welcome. You want to vote for the president? No, that has been sorted. They give you a ballot paper for the N.U.P. Why? Because they know that the level of civic awareness in up-country areas is still very low. So they thrive in that environment. So as a generation, and as I conclude, we need to find a way of leveraging the internet and other ICTs to make sure that young people everywhere are empowered and understand their rights. I can assure you, simply as a matter of passing of time, 10 years from now, we'll be freer than we are today, if for anything, because young people have been exposed and have been more educated.
Thank you very much, Akampulira, for that extensive engagement. I think we're getting to a conclusion. I'd want us to use at least 5 seconds just to chip into the way forward for us to conclude on this. We'll start from here.
Yeah, I'll try to be as quick as possible. Now, to just maybe respond to something that Jacob raised in terms of whether or not the young people are supposed to represent young people or represent Uganda. And I say yes and no, because if someone is elected to represent the young people, for the reason that young people have core issues that need to be addressed, and that person concentrates on the whole country, they easily forget the people whom they're supposed to represent. And that is why in the previous parliament, we didn't have any bill tabled by the youth MPs to front any issue, whether in terms of transforming the education system, which is for the young people, because it is mostly the young people who are in the education system. There was nothing. When the education sector was under demonstration, they were quiet. There is only, I think, once when, was it Honorable Mwine Mpaka, presented a motion on the issue of Penzi schemes. Apart from that, I did not hear anything else that the young people put out straight in terms of policy. we have very pertinent issues like access to land. They would maybe put out a bill that since the young people are being encouraged to engage into agriculture and they don't have ownership to land, how can we make sure that there is a friendly land acquisition policy for the young people in terms of leasing land? Because government leases land sometimes on loan to foreigners, but why can't it do it for young people? Those are the kind of issues that I expect from youth MPs and any young people in the councils. I think they need to concentrate.
Thank you very much, Joyce. I think let's get to Ruth as we move.
Yes, so thank you very much, Demian, for hosting. In my conclusion, last year, a group of young people came together, both youth in the formal sector, private sector, political parties, and we came up with the National Youth Manifesto 2021-2026. And in that National Youth Manifesto, there were a list of priorities that young people sat and agreed that, you know what, there is a lot that is going on with us, but at least these 5, in this government of 2021-2026, let's make sure that we are pushing for these priorities. And of course, they are about education. We all know what is wrong with the education system, but we also know it can get better. So issues around education, issues around health, issues around civic participation, advocacy and human rights, and issues around recreation, among others. So, and what we really decided with that National Youth Manifesto is irrespective of who we are and who we represent, we are going to work together 2021, 2026, and at least to ensure that the priorities that young people came up with, we demand government and we work with government and all other partners to ensure that at least we meet those demands. So I will conclude on the National Youth Manifesto. There is a copy that we can be able to share, but also let's all embrace it and work together towards implementing the National Youth Manifesto 2021-2026. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Let's go to Abubaker.
Yes, thank you. I think my conclusion will be in line with the submission of my brother Banga Kenny. And it's to emphasize human rights and rule of law. There are some people who, I agree with him that we should depoliticize or apoliticize human rights and rule of law issues because, like it has been said, fate is a joker. The reason why we push for human rights or human dignity is that today you may think you're safe, but tomorrow you never know when you are the one who will be across. We have seen leaders in this country who have engineered legislations and end up working against them. So we are all safer when we agree on certain standards that we can't go below. And the narrative that human rights are foreign or Western concept or they go, it's either all with development is not true. Every human being deserves to be treated with dignity, and that's good for all of us. And due process helps all of us. When government wakes up and just switches off internet, without a due process, does not matter whether you're NRM, whether you're what, your business will go down. Internet, for me, I look at it as sunlight. When you switch off internet arbitrarily, it's like switching off the sun or switching off air. What do you want to do in the dark? Because that's a dawn of darkness. And today you may think it's working for you, tomorrow it will work against you. So I think there are some basic minimums around human dignity and around human rights and around rule of law that we should all agree on and say, as a country, we have moved past this and we are not going to accept it. And one thing I want to recommend that we should all voice against is the continuous, of course, government in this country is militarized, but has been worsened now that all civic spaces are now being occupied by the military. There's a reason why our constitution differentiated roles for the police, for the army, for wildlife, for prisons. Otherwise, we would have one force that cuts across. But the objective for the creation of the body is different, the methods are different, the training is different, the facilitation is different. And so when you get one and put it in the role of the other, what results is anarchy, and nobody is safe. You just have a disagreement today, and before you know it, what you thought is crafted for other people goes against you. So I think we should all speak against the continuous militarization of all spaces now. In fact, when we are having the youth elections in Mbale, electing the youth MP, I actually approached the OC station and asked him, because I was seeing there were a few policemen and then so many soldiers, the military, and asked him, what's the problem? Why don't you have enough manpower in Mbale to manage an election of 1,500 young people? he actually said they don't have enough manpower, that they are not facilitated enough, so they need support from the sister agents. But from what I saw, it looked like the sister agents was the one getting support from police. So that, of course, also relates to court-martialing citizens. When you read our constitution, the UPDF Act was established to manage the recruitment, deployment, promotion, and discipline of members of UPDF. Civilians are not members of UPDF. Even if I was found with a gun, the penal code has an offense that relates to that. That does not make me a member of the UPDF. But all that is part of a ploy to strike terror into the minds of the citizens and keep them away from engaging in civic spaces. And I think these are things that we should all condemn regardless of which side of the political divide we are on.
Finally, to the Chairman, National Youth Council, kindly have your take on this.
Thank you. When you solve the problems of Ugandans, you're solving the problem of the youth of Uganda. When you solve the problems of the youth of Uganda specifically, you're not necessarily solving the problems of Uganda. This country will stay when we go. And I think that the sooner leaders, especially the young, realize that they have a call towards the country that is more immediate than a call towards an age group. For me, the wiser we shall be in long-term terms. In the struggle to liberate South Africa from the apartheid struggle, there was a time when the vanguards of the voice, the celebrated, were in prison, 27 years. I have only lived perhaps one more year than when Comrade Leader Mandela was in prison. But in that time, there were leaders among young people, like Solomon Malangu. There were leaders like Bantu Biko. They did not project their youth or their age. They projected the need of the people. And for me, that is where I want to come in. I have never agreed that human rights are a Western thing. I think they're a Pan-African thing, especially when we see Ugandans being treated like slaves by other Ugandans. I think it's a question of whether you value yourselves at the level of the world stage, or you think that there are more superior people than others. For me, that's how I view human rights. It's one thing to say call them human rights, but I call it human decency, basic human decency, to know that this is my fellow African and he deserves some decency, especially in areas where there is a lot of contest on the reason why you are taking them in.
Are you going to write a statement?
I was coming to that actually next. I was coming to that next. The second thing I want to say very clearly is that political contestation and political power is for contestation. The argument that every other person should be concerned about targeted political activity depends on to what extent that targeted activity actually affects basic human decency. I am totally, and I said it at the beginning of this show in case you didn't hear, that I am against the arbitrary arrest of Ugandans, whether they are N.U.P or they are F.D.C or they are NRM. I am against it. I think that basic decency requires that we have due process, and this is very clear. If you want a statement, we can.
We don't just want a statement.
No, it's protected. It's protected. Yeah, in the conclusion.
We want action.
If you want a statement, we can issue a statement to your pleasure, but I don't work to the pleasure of the N.U.P or the F.D.C. I work specifically to the substance of what we are saying, and we are not seated. We are not for PR like so many people require. We are for actual changes in certain things. So we are actually engaging at the military level and the police level. And I am not the kind of person that wants the PR of it. I'm the kind of person that wants the substance of it. Eventually, we will be absolved. Eventually, and you will see. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacob. And this is the point you realize when the conversation again gets heated, but we have to go. The Citizens Chat Show is always as heated and with informative engagements. I hope we can have this discussion next time. I will see how to invite us again so that we can have conclusions to some of these issues. But for now, our time is up from here, and we want to say thank you for being with us throughout the 2 hours, and we hope to see you again next Friday. Thank you very much. This is a Citizen Chat Show. I've been your host, Masesa Demiano. Good evening.